The 2025 budget landed yesterday, and right now, landlords across the country are trying to figure out what it means for them. Because many people were preparing for one outcome, but the budget delivered something very different. And the problem is, most landlords will make decisions this year based on what they think has happened, not what actually changed. So today, I'm joined by Nadeem Raziq, a chartered accountant who specialises in property taxation. We've both spent the last couple of days analysing every detail of this budget. And in this video, we're going to walk you through and explain what you need to know as a landlord and how to protect your portfolio. So Nadeem, before we get into what actually changed, I think we need to start with what didn't happen, because this is where most of the fear and the uncertainty that we've been living with for the last few months has come from.
Yes, Rob. I mean, in all honesty, I mean, I think the only place to start is the chaoticness we've had over the last few months, and obviously what that's done in terms of scaremongering, uncertainty, not understanding what to do. And obviously, because all these things have kind of been thrown around, it's kind of probably a good place to start, because we can sort of now give a little bit more clarity in terms of what's not gone through and what we were expecting there to go through. And I think one of the big things that we've been hearing, I think I made a note of this, there was about 12 separate leaks since August to today, which obviously has panicked a lot of people. But one of the biggest thing is potentially national insurance, which we had a very strong indication that would start coming in play for landlords. So historically, as you know, landlords have been exempt from paying national insurance on their property income because it's not been seen as a trade, and therefore exempt from national insurance contributions. And there was a strong whiff that something like that may well come into place for landlords specifically. Of course, the big one in terms of stamp duty, there's always been rumours about stamp duty rates changing, potentially even increasing that 5% additional surcharge to something even higher, or even changing the bands completely. And of course, that was this kind of £500,000 threshold that they were talking about, where if it exceeds that, the rates would go over higher. So really interesting to see that actually pretty silent on all those things. And hopefully that will bring some sort of calmness in terms of obviously stamp duty for at least the foreseeable future, and of course no national insurance contributions to pay for any property income.
Yeah, the amount of rumour and speculation this year, it's always bad, but I think it was worse than ever. And for me, what this really emphasises, the fact that everyone was panicking about these things, none of them ended up coming in. There are things we need to talk about, but none of those really big ones. It just, for me, shows the importance of not panicking and not making decisions based on rumour, because any decisions that you do make are going to be expensive one way or the other. And so many of these rumours end up never actually happening. And when you think back to the changes that we did have, the really big ones in, what was it, 2015? There was no indication of those in advance. And so there's really no point speculating.
Absolutely. And we always advise landlords to be agile, especially so for the last 4 or 5 years with all the changes that are happening. But you're quite right, not to panic and not to foresee trying to think in terms of what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, in terms of what the government's going to bring in place, what they might not bring in place. And actually, a good point to raise another point is the kind of the new power they've given now to the local mayors and your local councils to potentially charge an overnight for short-term lets. So furnished holiday lets have been impacted. So again, that was not something we were expecting. And it's something they've thrown in. Now, it may impact people, it may not impact people, because actually what they've done is they've given power to the local councils and mayors to decide if they want to do it at all. So we can't really sit here and say, actually, short-term lets and FHLs, rework your numbers, see what it's going to look like. Is it the right business opportunity for you to take? Because actually, in reality, you may be impacted depending on where it is, or you may not be impacted.
Exactly. And we try to do our bit to educate investors as best we can. So if you want to stay up to date with real property news, not just rumours, then you can join our free weekly newsletter using the link below. So while the most extreme changes didn't happen, that doesn't mean that nothing changed. There are still some changes in this budget that's going to cost everyone money. So Nadeem, we should probably start with the biggest one.
The main tax impact that we've seen, and we're going to see for landlords who have personally held properties, is this additional 2% band that they are introducing for basic rate, higher and additional rate tax earners. Now, this is not going to start until April 2027, so we have a while, but it is quite a material effect on people's taxes. So we talked about potentially national insurance not coming into place, and national insurance would have been at 8% up to the basic rate, and then 2% for any additional income. So we haven't hit that kind of level of surcharge here, but the additional 2%, so this is increasing people's basic rate from 20% to 22%, 40 to 42%, and 45 respectively to 47%. So it is having an incremental difference. I just did some quick numbers, so you can kind of work out how material this may impact a basic rate earner. So if someone who's got property income of £40,000 per year. Historically, given that taking their personal allowance away, they would have had a tax liability of about £5,500, just under £5,500. That then moving to 22% now from April 2027 will take them just over the £6,000 mark. So about a £540 uplift for a basic rate earner. So you can see it's not massively material, but if you look that in sort of monthly terms, there's an extra £50 a month. Now, the question, I'm sure we'll come on to this, is what does that mean from the landlord from a valuation perspective? And when we talk about people having a look at their portfolio, the yield and the return, and is a property worth its weight, then if you can, get that extra £50 back, or you're going to have to suffer that extra £50, those are kind of conversations and thinking processes that we need to start going through in the next year and a half. Because actually, does that mean if that's a cost you can absorb? Does that mean that's a cost you're going to have to pass on? And if it is something you can pass on, what does that mean in terms of the rest of the commerciality of your portfolio? So that's certainly quite a material change. And like I said, it's interesting that they've actually introduced that not from next year, but from the year after. So it's got me thinking as an advisor and landlord as well, is there a reason for that? Are they giving people time to think about exiting and kind of sell some properties because it may not be the right thing for them going forward? And it kind of gives people a bit of a window. Or is it kind of just a kind of a forewarning to say that actually there's potentially other things that are coming in the future, including national insurance? So it's an interesting one, but it's certainly a material thing that we are talking about. And actually, we had people already emailing us already since yesterday to say, how does this impact them, sort of personally? So really interesting for people to take a step back at this time, especially those ones with a heavier personally held portfolio, because obviously I've given a very basic example here, Rob, of just someone at a basic rate, but it could well be that someone's at a high rate. It could well be that they actually have other income as well as property income, because not only have they shifted the 2% in the property income savings band, they've shifted property away from non-savings income. So I don't really want to bore you with loads of tax stuff here, but historically, property income was seen as non-savings income. So it was the first slice of income that was taxed at the different bands. Property income has now been removed away from non-savings income. So it actually means if you have other forms of income, like self-employed, employed income, that would be the first slice of income tax that's going to use up your thresholds. Property income has been taken away from there, which means actually it's always going to get taxed at the higher rates after then savings and then dividends. So they've been very astute by creating a brand new band for property income from April 2027.
It's interesting, like you say, that it's not coming in straight away. Maybe it is another gentle nudge towards the exit, which is something that it seems to be they've been trying to achieve for quite a while. Get landlords to sell up, bring in some of that lovely capital gains tax that they know is going to be due. I don't know, it's kind of conspiracy theory territory now, but it's a possibility. That, of course, is going to affect people who have property that's personally held. But that doesn't mean that investors who hold property in limited companies are getting off scot-free.
No, it doesn't, unfortunately. So we've talked about the April 27 rules that are coming in for the extra 2% for property income, savings incomes, of course. But they've actually slightly quicker, i.e. April 2026, have increased the dividend rate. Now, again, that will impact everyone, not just landlords. So this impacts anyone who's taking any money out of their personal service company. So if you're a landlord with property in a personal limited company, and you have been taking money out in the form of a dividend, where historically you've been paying 8.7 and 33% at the basic and high rate, respectively, they've also gone up by 2% each as well. So we're now sort of at 10.75 and 35.75 at the high rate. Now, again, there's a little bit of control around that, because it comes down to, if you want to take dividends out, do you take dividends out? You might decide not to take as many out. So you can control that somewhat, because obviously as a shareholder of the business, you don't have to take dividends out. It's subject to you wanting to take any remuneration. But it is an impact, again, a material impact of 2%. And that's on top of them obviously eroding the dividend allowance down over a number of years, where, here was sort of 10,000, 5,000, and currently it's £500. Thankfully they're not taking that away completely as well. So you can see where they're headed with this, in terms of obviously, yes, limited company incorporations have been more popular. A lot of people using limited companies, and they're now wanting to sort of say, right, okay, if you are taking money out there, we want a bit of a slice in that. And actually, one of the points you raised before, Rob, was quite interesting, because when we talk about potentially giving time to people to exit and think about that, it's interesting they've not done anything on CGT, because that was another area that potentially there were some rumours about increasing the bans for residential properties, removing the capital gains tax allowance, which virtually has gone down to 3,000, and that's pretty much as low as it's been for a number of years. And if they did actually play around with the CGT and for example, reduce the tax-free allowance or increase the rates for residential disposals, that may have deterred people from selling their properties. So it's interesting to see that they're given some time to think about what the income tax rate's going to do, but then actually not messed about with the capital gains tax rates, because it's almost like they didn't want to put people off to sell, for example. So they've kept the capital gains tax where there is. So there's a lot to potentially think about in terms of what their thought process has been behind this, if any.
And something else that we had confirmed in the budget, which sounds a bit technical, but it's going to affect a lot of people, is making tax digital, which we know now is going to come in next year.
Yeah, that's right, Rob. So it wasn't mentioned, so we're taking it as read that it is happening, and it's going to come into place as of April 2026, as we imagined, and that will impact obviously all property income landlords and self-employed people with turnover of more than £50,000. So we're expecting that to sort of start to affect about 3 million landlords straight away. Nothing came out of the budget apart from them just saying there's some softening on the penalty regime. That's going to start again from April 2026, similar to how MTD started for VAT. So yeah, it's another thing for landlords to be aware of. April 2026, making tax digital is here.
Yeah, but if you don't know what that is, don't worry. We'll put out another video a bit nearer the time telling you everything you need to know about that. So that's all pretty much in the realms of tweaks, unwelcome tweaks, but still tweaks to existing taxes. But there has been one genuinely new tax introduced that will affect some people in property, and that is the mansion tax.
This was, again, one of the rumours that, again, we've been hearing about, so probably isn't too much of a shock to everybody in terms of, hearing about this. And I guess the only shock was they kind of moved the asset value being more than 1.5 million to sort of 2 million. So that catches even sort of less in terms of properties in the UK. I think they're talking about sort of less than 1% in terms of what's going to be affected. And it seems like a bit of more of a political move rather than sort of any kind of financial kind of gain in the short term, because, I think a lot of the payments, I mean, this is going to start from April 2028, firstly, so we're a couple of years away from that even starting. And then obviously the payments can be deferred to sort of death or at the point of disposal in inheritance tax. So it doesn't seem like there's anything for the short-term gain, more of a political thing in terms of sort of, trying to say, we're putting a bit more burden on those with a wider shoulders, as it were. So yeah, I don't think that's going to cause any material impact. And with landlords, we'll see pretty much a minimal impact.
What I thought was interesting was, obviously, the effect is mainly going to be in London, so it's going to affect like prime central London probably more than anywhere else. But it was described as like an addition to council tax, but unlike council tax, which falls upon the occupant, this new surcharge falls upon the owner. So I suppose for the small minority of people who are renting out homes worth more than 2 million, that's going to affect their numbers in quite a big way. But again, we're talking about very small numbers of people here.
Yeah, we're talking about a very small number of people. And obviously, in terms of the cap, I think it's like 2,500 up to 7,500 in terms of how that's going to affect their council tax rates again for the landlord. So material, someone who's sort of renting out a property in London for £2 million, an extra £6,000-7,000, probably it's not going to be a material impact. And like I say, the numbers involved are going to be absolutely minimal in terms of how this is going to impact our landlords.
Okay, so what we've talked about so far are clear and direct hits to landlords' pockets, but there is another change in the budget that is more subtle, but in some ways more expensive over the long term. It's actually the biggest revenue raiser by far out of anything in the budget, even though it looks so subtle. Because people tend to think that if tax rates don't rise, then their tax bill stays the same. And politicians rely on this. And so instead of increasing the rate of tax, they just freeze the thresholds. But that means that over time, we're all going to end up paying more, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. And, this was the stealth tax, as they call it, that we were kind of expecting. And it's been quite unusual because of the last sort of 15, 20 years of me being an accountant, even when I was studying, the personal allowances used to go up, your tax thresholds used to go up. And obviously since 2023, it's been frozen to where it is now. And the government announced that was going to be frozen to 2028. So we were expecting them to be frozen for the next 2 years. And this is our tax-free personal allowance of 12,500. Our basic rate threshold, which takes us to about 50,200, and then obviously any additional taxes to pay over that. Now, what the government have announced in the budget is that that's now going to be frozen up to 2031, which means regardless of where your income is going, and most time in terms of inflation, or as a property investor, your rental amount is going up or your salary might be going up. You may not think, well, actually the tax rates have gone up, but actually in reality, in real life, because inflation and rental income and your salary has gone up, you are actually getting pushed into the higher bracket, or you're earning more and therefore you're paying more. And what those tax-free thresholds should be doing over time is going up in line with inflation to reflect that if you are getting more income, you're not paying more tax, because it kind of defeats the object of having a pay rise, as it were. Now, what that means is this stealth tax is now in place until 2031, which means pretty much everyone's going to be impacted by this. And like quite rightly said, this is one of the biggest pocket earners for the government, for the exchequer, in terms of what that's going to bring into the revenue. So 3 years is a long time now. So where we are now, 2025, is another 6 years of basically saying, actually, whatever your income goes up now, you're going to be paying more tax. And this is obviously going to have an impact on everyone, not just landlords. And again, from a forecasting point of view, from an advice point of view, we say to people that actually, if you are thinking about increasing rent because of things like your income tax now going up, as per my example earlier on, what does that actually mean? Because yes, you may want to increase an extra £50 to cover the additional 2% rent you're earning, but that additional £50 rent is then taxable income. And what does that mean from your taxable brackets? Because actually, as that rental income goes up, you're earning more, and your tax thresholds aren't going in line with that. It ultimately means more tax. So this is a generic stealth tax that's coming in place for everyone, not just landlords, but it's something that will impact your bottom line. And this is regardless of whether you have properties in your personal name or a limited company, because obviously if you are earning in your limited company and taking money out of your company, the income tax rates still apply, and that stealth tax still kind of indirectly will apply to you.
Yeah. If you think about what the cumulative inflation is going to be between 2023, which is when they were first frozen, and 2031 at least, which they're frozen till now, the cumulative inflation of your rental income, your earned income, of everything, that's going to amount to quite a big tax increase for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And specifically for landlords, if we talk about, with all the kind of things that have come in place for landlords with 4 or 5 years, from Section 24 to sort of renters' right to sort of energy performance work they've got to do, to now income tax rates going slightly higher. What does the next 3, 4, 5 years bring? Well, actually, they're saying, I think Rightmove and basically said that by 2030 we then need 1 million extra rental properties out there just to keep up with demand. And if we do have landlords exiting, per some of the conversations we've had, then actually demand will go higher. Supply will be short, demand will be higher, and that will ultimately increase rent values. And increasing rent values will ultimately push those ones who are earning into a higher tax threshold, etc. So it's kind of a cycle that we're going through right now, and it'll be interesting to see how we come out of it by 2030, 2031, and if there are any more changes. But it's now our job to really navigate to that, and I'm sure we'll come on to in terms of how we can help people. But it's a really interesting 2-3 years that we've got coming up for landlords right now.
So now we know what was in the budget, and I think there's, like we said, a lot of fear. A lot of people could think, well, this is going to be the end of property investing now. They're going to do something even more extreme. None of that's happened, but there is, of course, a need for better planning, because the tax burden just keeps getting higher, which means the rewards for structuring your affairs correctly and being smart about it become higher as well. So what are you going to be advising your clients in the wake of this budget?
I mean, firstly, it's great that the budget has come to a conclusion, because we can now give some sort of certainty, because the biggest thing for landlords is having, and the market, of course, is having some sort of certainty in the market. And so the first thing I actually looked at post the budget was actually how it affected the market. And it didn't really have much of an impact, which is great, because that has an indirect consequence on lenders, on banks, on consumer confidence, etc. The usual things that we look for. And the tax things are there and they won't go away. It's just how you're more smart about it. So we're not going to be reinventing the wheel here. It's really looking at how your portfolio, however small or big it is working in the most efficient way. The demand won't go away. The rental income won't go away. And it's our job to sort of direct landlords in the right way to make sure they are maximizing their portfolio. So again, if it is a case of thinking about how this 2% income tax rate increases and affects your bottom line, because that's what it comes down to. Bottom line, what does it affect you? How does it affect you? But the addition 2%, Rob, and I should have really raised this earlier on, obviously you are still getting your mortgage interest relief. That Section 24 impact that we had a number of years ago, where you used to get 20% relief. that still is now going to go to 22%. So if you're a basic rate getting mortgage interest, you're still going to get the 22% relief on the 22% tax you're paying. So actually, if you're in a position where your mortgage interest is still pretty healthy, you're a basic rate payer, actually the difference will probably be negligible because actually your interest is offsetting it. So it's really important you look at your personal situation and actually how that impacts you. If you were sort of on the fence about keeping properties in your personal name, using a limited company, have that chat, understand what that's going to mean for you over the next couple of years, in line with what's sort of happening in terms of income tax rate increases, dividend income rates, and have a look at how your portfolio build looks. Things like the FHL and the short-term stay, that might impact you materially or immaterially. But again, without sort of going through it sort of line by line and property by property, it's difficult to sort of give people generic advice and say this is the right thing for you. So we always say just take a breather. Again, don't panic because of what's happening in the budget. What we've hopefully now seen is a bit of calm, and we hopefully will see some calm in the next few months. And be smart is really the right thing. I mean, actually, I know you mentioned Derby a few times, Rob, and it was mentioned yesterday about the investment they were putting into Derby. She specifically mentioned Rachel Reeves in the budget. So there are still areas that are really, really popular, will always do well, and it's about understanding where your long-term plans fit with sort of how you can sort of navigate in the short term to get there. And it's our job as advisors and tax advisors, hopefully, specifically, to make sure that that's done in the most tax efficient way.
Yeah, and I know that you offer tax consultations, and I know you've also written a blog post that goes into some of this in more detail, so we'll make sure that that's all linked up in the description. But broadly, I wouldn't say that the budget is good for property investors, except I suppose it wasn't actively that bad, which makes it good by standards of what we've seen in the past. But I think, like you hinted at earlier, having a bit of certainty and having the markets not be spooked, that's got to be a good sign for the market.
It is, Rob. And, we've been having conversations with our clients, our landlords over the last 4 or 5 months. And we've really felt it in terms of, not wanting to do things because of the uncertainty. So it's really important. Numbers, yes, are very important. Bottom line, what's in your pocket, very important. But obviously, when landlords buy properties, investments, these are always long-term projects. And if it means a little bit short-term pain, fine. But this is all about the long-term. And the long-term really relies on sort of market factors. And obviously, one of the biggest things is just having some sort of market continuity. I mean, not being chaotic like it has been over the last 12, 18 months. So we're really hoping this brings some sort of calmness to the market. We've seen it already. A few banks have already come out and we've seen some rates calm down. And I think hopefully that will be reflected over the next 5, 6 months. And that will give sort of the landlords more confidence to continue investing.
Yes, hopefully so. Now, it's one thing to understand what's in this budget. It's quite another to know exactly which properties will still generate those strong long-term returns despite these changes. And that is why we partner with the very best developers in the country to give our clients access to off-market deals with built-in discounts. So if you want to see what's currently available, get in touch with our team using the link in the description. So there you have it, the 2025 budget broken down by an expert. And the landlords who will succeed next year and over the long term are the ones who understand these changes, adapt their strategies, and focus on finding genuinely good deals. And speaking of strategy, if you want a comprehensive blueprint for building a profitable portfolio in 2026, you need to watch this video next. In it, we break down the exact steps you need to take to make £100,000 per year from property.